Hi, welcome to the last speaker of the Criminology Forum series, sponsored by the Department of Sociology, Criminology, and the Criminal Justice Research Center. We are very honored today to have one of our own alumni, Dr. Amy Anderson. She is an alum from 2003, studied under Dr. Wayne Osgood, did a lot with unstructured socializing and peer networks. More recently, her work has been looking specifically at the death penalty, attitudes toward the death penalty, religion, and political leanings. So I'm going to let her tell you more about herself because I'm sure she can elaborate much better. We're very excited to have you, Amy. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm excited to share my research with you. I know everybody's tired. It's the end of the semester, so I appreciate that you come out. So today I'm presenting a paper that I'm working on with a colleague of mine, Bill Schwadell. We actually met in this very classroom in Glenn Fireball's statistics class, since he's also a former graduate student here. So we're working on some death penalty work together. And we had this one big paper, and for a number of reasons, it became kind of an unwieldy paper, and we split it into two. Broadly, both of them were interested in the relationship between college education and death penalty support, but around conservative ideologies and views more broadly. We split them into one paper that focuses more on religion and views that way, and one that is about politics and views that way. And the politics one is actually the one that I'm going to present to you today. I had not recalled the title when I submitted it. I think I was going to include religion, but there's a lot here, so it's okay. The title of my talk is College Education and the Death Penalty, Attitudes, or the Moderating Role of Politics. So the big picture generally is that for at least white individuals, we find that a college education tends to reduce support for the death penalty. And what we were interested in here was whether or not that was true for all white folks in particular, or whether maybe Republicans and conservatives were maybe college education had less of an effect on their views of the death penalty. Okay. My name is Amy Anderson. I did not introduce myself any further than Megan introduced me, so that's all you get, I guess. Questions for the end, I suppose. Okay, so as most of you likely know,
make sure you share your screen. I'm not seeing it
am I
on
not
Zoom.
shared?
Yeah, thank you. There you go. Very good.
Thank you. This out of the way. Is it all on there? Can I get this out somehow?
Not here, but what I see is the full screen on Zoom.
Okay.
I think it just disappeared. I think it does disappear.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Okay, so over 70% of the world has actually abolished the death penalty. The United States is in a minority of countries and territories that does use the death penalty. And when you look at support for the death penalty among Americans, Americans are likely to support the death penalty. I have here a graph from Pew that shows right now at April of 2021, support was at 60% favor and 39% who oppose. And that dropped, you can see 5% or so across that time period where opposition went up. But generally speaking, about 60% of Americans support the death penalty. Now, when we start looking at that, there are subgroup variations within that. So for example, men are more likely to support the death penalty than women. Whites are more likely to support the death penalty than African Americans. And so for us in my talk today and what I'm interested in the effect of college education and subgroup variation there related to politics. So what I'm going to do first is to turn to some trends and some general information about education level, and then I'll turn to some information about politics and the death penalty to kind of help create some of the framework for our questions here today. So here is just to get an idea of what education and support for the death penalty looks like. Maybe this isn't particularly surprising, but the more education you get, the less likely you are to support the death penalty. And so you can see that kind of stepwise pattern there. So the bold numbers give you the overall percentages. And on the far left side, it starts with strongly opposed to favor to strongly favor. And that's how this works. So you can see about 55% once you're up in the post-grad level who oppose to 44% who support. So a college education theoretically should reduce support for the death penalty. We can imagine some reasons why that might be. You learn about a variety of things, liberal arts educations. You might be exposed to actual information about the death penalty and whether it works and deterrence effects and things like that. You might be exposed to inequality, structural racism, any number of things that might reduce your support for the death penalty. Critical thinking skills, empathy, all of that sort of thing. And so we have the in-classroom and out-of-classroom learning that you could imagine might lead to the graph that we just saw. There's also evidence when you look within college sample students that the freshmen tend to be the most punitive and the seniors are the least punitive. So as you move through your education, you're becoming less punitive across time. These ideas are actually consistent with the Marshall hypothesis. Some of you might be familiar with this. This was Justice Marshall and Furman v. Georgia in 1972, who put out there this idea of evolving standards of decency and suggested that America would do away with the death penalty or abolish it under the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment if we had an informed but not retributive citizenry. So an informed public would actually abolish the death penalty. To the degree we think college informs people and rationalizes them, we would expect them to be less retributive, and you would expect to see perhaps that college education would reduce support for the death penalty. Now, one of the things that comes out in this that you can kind of see at the bottom there is when you look at the relationship between college education and support for the death penalty, most of the time they just pooled folks together and they just have a sample. But if you break it apart into whites and African Americans in particular, we find that for whites, you generally find a reduction in support for the death penalty. There's some research that shows that for African Americans, education might actually increase support for the death penalty. It's a whole kind of other ballgame there. But generally speaking, college education does reduce support for the death penalty for whites. So what we were interested in is whether that is an actual effect, that is it just apply to whites across the board, or does it affect different groups differently? And our assumption, of course, is that for Republicans or conservatives, this effect of college education isn't going to be the same as for other groups, and that it might actually, the effect of college education would depend on their politics. So when we look at politics, this is why there's a lot of research out there. Punitive political views are related to punitiveness, where Republicans, and I did this, I didn't know Wayne was going to be here, but I was going to make a joke about this is his least favorite framing of anything, right? Have long been is like the worst thing there. So I kind of did it sort of half in jest, but Republicans have long been supporters of the death penalty and conservatives have long been supporters of the death penalty. And in fact, when you look at different kinds of demographic groups, so whether you want to look at marriage or religion or gender, whatever you're looking at, what we find is that Republicans themselves have the highest support of the death penalty of all the different kinds of subgroups that you can look at. So when we look at this in graph form, you see here is our 60% line that I had up earlier. And you can see that the Republicans and Republican-leaning folks support the death penalty 77%, compared to about 46% for Democrat and Democrat-leaning folks. So we have huge disparity. There's a lot of difference there in support for the death penalty between these two groups. Now, when we take those groups and we break them into their ideological distinctions, what we see is that it's conservatives that tend to support the death penalty more than other groups. And that's true whether we're looking here at our Democratic conservative moderates versus our conservatives up here for Republicans. So you see that while Republicans support the death penalty at about 77%, the conservative Republicans are at 82%. And then the title of this, of course, is because you get this great discrepancy between liberals and conservative moderates in that Democratic camp. But overall, conservatives are more likely to support the death penalty. Okay, so here's my attention grabber graph that I'm going to show. So some of you may have seen this in Pew and maybe others haven't. This is the percentage of Republicans who say that colleges or universities have a positive or a negative effect on the way things are going in this country. And so what you see in particular is, you know, surprise maybe between 2015 and 2017, you get this grand tank in the Republicans' view of higher education, where they move from, they started there only at 53%, but only a third of this group now believe that higher education has a positive influence on the way things are going in this country. So for Democrats, by comparison, they started about 67%, and they go up a hair and then they tick back down to 67%. The average is about half. So you see that there's a real decline here amongst this group of people. And so these things kind of lead us to wonder whether Republicans and conservatives, the effect of having a college degree is sort of minimized among that group when you look at support for the death penalty. So there's more negative views of higher education among Republicans, as I just showed. And so these are just some reasons why this might be not, we can't test these in the study, but there are reasons to suspect this. So you have this negative view. Some other things that people have put out there are it's death penalty support is emotional, and you're not likely to override emotions. It's not rational, and so you don't have rationality necessarily involved. You have issues around moral or cultural schemas where things that is sort of the attribution by things that fit with what you believe, you kind of accept, but if it doesn't, you know, it's harder, it's easier to just reject that information. You have a group that has strong messages about crime and who criminals are and soft on crime or tough on crime and all of that kind of stuff. And they are more punitive generally, so you could imagine why this would be minimized. These ideas are also consistent with, I know Eric Silver's done some work on moral foundations, and that stuff fits really well with this too, whether you have the individualizing group that's more liberal or the binding group that's more conservative. So I would just put that out there as well. Okay, so a couple of research questions that we have. First is just to look to see, does a college degree actually reduce support for the death penalty? And then next we look at this interaction effect. So what we're interested in is, does the effect of college education on support for the death penalty differ or vary, conditioned, moderated by political identity? And we look at political identity both as party and as your ideology, because those things are a little bit different. Now, we do expect racial differences, and the reasons for that will become clear as I go through this presentation. It'll be obvious that we needed to separate these groups from each other. Okay. All right, so our data are the GSS, General Social Survey. We use the years 2002 to 2018. This is a nationally representative survey. And because we have a lot of groups, so the original coding is, you know, you have 7 categories of what, but you've got groups that are a lot of groups. We want college educated and not college educated. We're trying to split by race. So we pooled all of these together so we had enough power to, you know, do what we needed to do. We used adults that are over the age of 25. That's a general kind of cutoff point. It gives people 6 years to get through college. Most people who do it in that time. So surveys that look at this often will use that 25 and older as the cutting point to finish college. We did remove respondents with missing data. Now we reran the analyses with imputed data and went through the whole rigmarole with that, and the results were pretty similar. Now what I'm presenting in the next couple of slides for our results are going to be first and second differences. And to run those analyses, we needed to have unimputed we needed to have just the raw data and not the imputed data and stated to do that at the time. So we run with just our sample with our missing data. Our sample sizes are just over 11,000 for our white respondents and just over 3,000 for our non-white respondents. We cannot break this non-white respondent into any kind of further, anything further than this. For enough power to run the interactions, we don't have enough respondents, so it would be African American. That's the only group we can kind of identify. And so we really can't break this apart. Okay, so on the right-hand side here, you see our control variables that are pretty common with these sorts of studies. Our dependent variable is support for the death penalty. So that is people who favor the death penalty for persons convicted of murder. The college education is the dummy variable. It's just coded 1 if you have a bachelor's degree. We have political party, and it's a categorical variable. It's Republican, Independent, Democrat. All the leaners are grouped in with the group they lean towards because they tend to be similar to each other. And then we have political orientation, which is the a 7 category, you know, it's a scale kind of thing from very liberal to very conservative, extremely liberal to extremely conservative. And those are our main measures that we're using. Okay. So just to show you some descriptives, and this helps set the stage for part of why you could see a lot of why we separated out our white and our non-white respondents in this table. So the first thing to draw your attention towards, and these are just descriptives, is that 71% of our white sample supported the death penalty, while only half of our non-white sample supported the death penalty. So you've got differences there. Also, when you look at just getting a bachelor's degree, just over a third of the white respondents had a bachelor's degree compared to under a quarter of the non-white respondents. So we've got differences there. When you look at saying you're a member of the Republican Party, whites, 42% are more likely to say that compared to only 13% of non-whites who actually identify as Republican. And that helps as part of the reason we like to also look at political orientation, because those things, you know, you might be a moderate no matter what, even if I, you know, care about Democrats or I don't. And the last thing to note is just the large percentage of non-whites who identify as being Democrats. So that's 70%. So you can see there's some real differences here between our white and our non-white sample. And from prior research and the way our sample looks, it made sense to split our sample. Okay. So we ran 2 models, and for each we have non-whites and we have whites, and one's for party and one's for interact, but there's 2 basic kinds of models that we're running. And the first is just a binary logistic regression, and that's where we look at our main effects. So what I have presented in the tables are the marginal effects at the means, and that is just the marginal change in the probability of support in the death penalty for change in the independent variable. So here we're just getting around some of the problems with interpreting logistic regression with just set of problems out there. So just the marginal effects at the mean, all else equal, here's what that effect is. And then we introduce our interaction terms into that model. And I don't present here today any kind of interaction terms for you to see. Instead, we follow Mize's approach of presenting first and second differences to test for our interaction effects. So our first effects are really going to see whether having a degree matters. And then our second differences are going to be the interaction between the different groups to see whether having a degree, that effect varies by your political preferences. Okay. So here's our marginal effects at the means from our logistic models. This answers our first research question. Does a college education reduce support for the death penalty? And what you see here with having a bachelor's degree for our white respondents is the answer is yes, it does. So in model 2 there, once we introduce our political measures, you see that for having a bachelor's degree for white respondents reduces the probability of supporting the death penalty by 0.15. When you look at our non-white respondents, you see there's no effect at all for having a degree. So their political measures are significant, but not whether or not you have a degree. Now, one of the things, just kind of a side note, not anything we're interested in, but that difference between that 0.18 and the 0.1, that looks like it's a little bit of a moderating effect. And we did run some tests on that. And there is a little bit of moderation going on there from those political measures. Okay, so now let's look at the first big table I got here. And this is what they look like. And hopefully, well, that's just over top of a standard error, but man, I wish that thing would go away. There's no way to get this out of here. No. Okay, so what we see here at the top, for a Democrat that has no bachelor's degree, the predicted probability, all else equal, supporting the death penalty is 0.74. And when you get a bachelor's degree, it reduces your probability of support down to 0.48. So you go from 0.75 down to below half. The difference between that is what you see here in this first differences column, 0.26. And that difference is significant. So what that means is that having a bachelor's degree significantly reduces your support for the death penalty, right? For independents, you get a reduction in the probability of support of about 0.14. And for Republicans, it's 0.09. So this is, I can't see my number down under there. It goes from 0.83 to 0.74. That difference is 0.09. On all of those differences are significant. So that means that getting a bachelor's degree reduces, your probability of supporting the death penalty. Our second difference is just our interactions. And so what we see here is that effect of having a degree is significantly different between independents and Democrats. And that effect of having a degree is different between Republicans and Democrats. But it's not significantly different between Republicans and independents. Those tests show that they're actually, that they look different, but they're similar values. So you have similar kinds of reduction in support for the death penalty between Republicans and independents, but their Democrats are different from both groups. Now, when we change this from looking at party to looking at political ideology, it all kind of shifts a little bit more extreme on all ends here. Oops. Okay, let's do this. So now, when we look at liberals and getting a college degree, you see the reduction in support for the death penalty is almost a third to 0.31. So there's only about 40% support for the death penalty there once you have a bachelor's degree. For moderates, we get a reduction of about 0.15 in the support for the death penalty. But for conservatives down there, you see, first of all, to notice they start at 84% support the death penalty for the 0.84. It reduces down when you get a college degree all the way down to 0.81, which if you remember was still higher. The Republican average was 77%. So these are still well above all of that and well above, the other numbers we have on there. So then when we look at our interactions, these are significant. So the effect of having a degree is significantly different between all of these groups. And what our hypothesis was that the Republicans and conservatives in particular, their effects would be minimized. And we can see that at least here with the conservatives. When we were looking at the Republicans, 0.09 is, it may seem small, but it's almost a tenth coming off of there. So, that's not, it's something. Here you get the borderline significance and it's a pretty small effect. Okay. Now, what happens when we look at our non-white sample is a totally different story. And that's, when we first went down this path, we tried to only focus on the white sample and we can't really do that. So here we are with our non-white sample. Let's see if I can split this somewhere. Okay. So here you see that the Democrats with and without a bachelor's degree are exactly the same in their support of the death penalty. Independents, you get a little bit of an effect for having a bachelor's degree, but it's not significant. And Republicans with a bachelor's degree, you get a tiny little reduction there, but it's not significant. And none of our interactions here are significant. So we have no real effects going on here with our non-white sample. Now, you might think back to the earlier slide that I had, well, a couple of earlier slides. One is about the breakup by party, by race. So we had 60s, you had high amounts of non-whites in the Democratic Party, not in the Republican Party. So, and also that conservatives themselves were more supportive of the death penalty. So breaking it apart by ideology actually gives us a little bit different picture of this. Okay. So here what we find is that for non-whites, when you have liberals with a bachelor's, no bachelor's degree start at 0.51. So you're already starting significantly lower than a lot of the white starting points were. You get a reduction of about 0.09 when you get a bachelor's degree for that group. For moderates, there's no effect at all. And for conservatives, it has the opposite effect. And this is not the first study that found this. And this is part of the reason we broke this apart by race, is there are other studies that have found, or at least one other one, that when you do racial differences, you don't get the same effect of getting a degree between whites and African Americans in some cases. Now, our sample is non-white, so it includes other groups, it includes Asians that have high support of the death penalty, it includes Hispanics that also have higher support of the death penalty than African Americans, but the majority of our sample is African American. So anyway, so we get this increase in support of the death penalty for conservatives who have a bachelor's degree. When we look at our interactions over here, they're all significant. So you're going to get that difference that the degree makes and how much it drops your probability of support varies. It's different between these different groups. And of course, it's going to be, you know, we get the opposite stairwise pattern here where you get you get a reduction for liberals, no effect for moderates, and an increase for conservatives. All right. Okay. Let me move this around again here. That back. Okay, so just to kind of go, you know, back over it after all the fun little tables. So does a college education reduce support for the death penalty? Yes, for our white respondents. For the average respondent, having a white respondent having college degree reduced that predicted probability of support by 0.15. But there was no effect for having a degree for our non-white sample. Then this was our interaction. Is it conditioned or moderated by political identity? Mostly yes for our white sample. There were no differences between Republicans and independents. Those, the effect of the degree there was similar, but we had differences between all of our other groups. No, for our non-whites, for political party, the effect of that degree on attitudes towards the death penalty was similar. We don't have differences there. But we did have differences when we start looking at political orientation. So the effect of that degree on attitudes was different between liberals, moderates, and conservatives. Okay, overall, a college degree then reduced the probability of death penalty to support the most for liberals and the least for conservatives amongst white and non-white respondents. Now, for non-white conservatives, it increased it. So, you know, it's kind of funny, but we get the most out of the liberal groups and the least out of the conservative groups. And this, so then there is some support for the Marshall hypothesis here. If an informed public doesn't support the death penalty among a lot of the groups, you did get that reduction. We have one group that went up, even though one non-white group that went up, but among our white groups, we do see some support for the death penalty, even if this is only a really small amount. And also, of course, support was still very, very high, even with that degree. So some limitations and future research to kind of touch on quickly here. We had cross-sectional and pooled data because we wanted to be able to break our groups up into small groups. And some of our analysis, we left, we didn't group leaners in, we checked to see whether things matched. We got similar results and things like that. So we needed this big data set. So we can't tell things like, if I started college as a Republican who supported the death penalty, and I left college as a Democrat who doesn't support the death penalty, I can't pick that up in these data. These data are already out there. You're above 25. We need longitudinal data to follow changing attitudes, and we don't have that here. There may also be differences in recent time points in those closer to 2002. So our data was from 2002 to 2018. When we, and the religion paper that we're working on, when we split those into decades to kind of look, we saw that religion had a lot of effect in the earlier years, but not a lot of effect in the later years. It kind of washed out. And so it may be that this politics effect is in those later years, but we really maybe don't see that as politics became more tainted around higher education and all of these kind of things. this effect of politics may be something that's a more recent thing, and the earlier time points may not actually show that. And so one of the things we're interested in, Phil and I, is whether it shifted from religion to politics over time, these kinds of messaging. We also, of course, need better measurement of our non-white respondents. These groups really need to be examined separately. The support for the death penalty is very different amongst these groups. Asians are very comparable to whites. Hispanics are a little bit below that, but African Americans are more split half and half. So they're very different groups and they have very different attitudes about the death penalty, and they really should not just be grouped in together. Of course, we did not test these theoretical mechanisms. This is the bane of my existence in the review process, because this is what we keep getting told, but you're not testing any of these things. Okay, so yeah, we didn't test these theoretical mechanisms. There's a lot of reasons to suspect that this effect would be minimized for Republicans and conservatives. But more research is needed to kind of get into that to figure it out. I talked a little bit about at the beginning about cultural schemas and, you know, kind of attribution bias, and it's easy to accept information that fits with what we know and harder to kind of process stuff that is inconsistent with what we think. And so maybe that's part of it. We have conservatives in particular that are getting these messages blasted through the media and from politicians and about ideas about crime and criminals and all of that sort of thing. And, you know, more research into how that might play into this. But generally speaking, college can reduce the death penalty support. This is me sort of trying to go out on a good note, kind of, but not. College can reduce the death penalty, support for the death penalty, despite negative views of it amongst white Republicans, and even if just a little among our white conservatives. Our non-white groups are kind of a different beast. And so while there's some support for the Marshall hypothesis that they're becoming informed and less retributive, you know, it's not really coming through hard. So there's some probably retribution that's going to tie into that moral foundation stuff a little bit about how people think about crime and punishment and social control. And I think that is it. But I'll show you these couple of graphs for fun here. So here, when we break it all apart and we don't just use conservative, moderate, liberals, but we leave it so it varies a lot. You can see now what's going on here. You get some stepwise stuff going on here. When you compare that to the non-whites, so this is kind of the difference here. So they are starting a little bit lower, but you can see the conservative side of it is going to be more supportive of the death penalty when they have the bachelor's degree. When they don't, compared to moderates. So this took a really long time when I practiced it by myself. So of course it's going to be really short when I come in to review it. It was like an hour. No, I know. I kept on like, oh my God, I got to cut slides out of it and all the rest of it. I took stuff out to try to not go long, and then I talked too fast.
Well, you've got a great crowd here.
Probably forgot stuff.
I'll
So-
start us out with a question while everyone warms up. So one of your control variables, you were looking at region.
Mm-hmm.
Did anything pan out there? I know it was a control variable, it wasn't your variable of interest.
Yes.
Just with the black.
There
white,
were some
south.
a few of the regions for whites were significant. What was the most interesting about region finding was that for non-whites, mountain was significant. That was the only, like, this region, that was it. I go back to my paper, but it's a really kind of odd, strange kind of thing. But yeah, there were a few.
So south, like, wasn't significant.
For non-whites, no. For whites, I'd have to go back and look. Asking me about my control variable. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there like a dosage effect? Like, does some college lower it a bit and then you get your 4-year? And
Right,
then some more,
right.
And then graduate school pushes it.
They, I think the research is more mixed when they don't cut it as college degree and they just try to use years of schooling, and I'm not sure about that dosage effect, but, certainly when they do, it does seem to reduce a little bit as you go through. So, I mean, Yeah, but I don't know what that dosage is. I don't know where it
Could I
is.
take it back?
Yes,
Say hi to Phil.
I will tell him you said
And-
hi.
And he thinks.
I figure you're
owe
here
a
for him.
paper, And I think he owes me a paper. So
Okay.
We don't do anything, no. So the paper we're doing is on religion. And
Yes.
they're very similar kinds of
Yes.
effects, right?
Mhm.
And you make a really good point that would help with your causal argument. And you don't have to completely redo it, but if you did show exposure to education. Because all the same things that are happening in college happen at an earlier age, just different level.
Mhm.
But all those same things happen. And so if you could show that, I think it would help you with your causal effect, if you said exposure dosage.
Yes,
It doesn't have to be your main thing.
right. Oh, okay. So related to that, you're priming my brain a little bit. We did run an associate's degree, like the A.
Yeah.
And there's no, that didn't have the same effect as college degree did.
Sure, and I believe
yeah.
it's, but if you looked at high school
Yes,
and before high
Mm,
school,
yes.
you should get an effect.
In the
And,
data.
and you might also want to point out that like religion, college doesn't completely flip people. It's the same with politics, right? They come in, they are what they are, and it modifies them. And I think you could, and there's some other attributes about behavior about people with more education does the same thing. It doesn't completely change them, right? It modifies them.
You mean
And I-
Democrats become more liberal and Republicans?
No, people, yeah, that can happen. Or in religion, more educated folks keep their religion, but they are better at defending why they're religious. That kind of thing. We don't make them, we don't brain them.
You don't make them make this.
Oh.
Don't-
You're in Florida.
Yeah, right.
Maybe. Okay. All right, I think part of what we were thinking about too was that some of the stuff that might actually expose you directly to things that might reduce your support for the death penalty would be like upper division, it's like later in your career before you get to that stuff more. And so that was a little bit of it, but yeah, I take your point for sure.
Yeah, and I was just gonna piggyback on that idea is that, and you probably don't have measured this, but, the selection of course of study and how conservatives may be selecting themselves into
Different kinds,
areas that
mhm.
they're not gonna be challenged on these ideas, whereas a liberal, family member is gonna come to liberal arts, and then we're changing.
Right, and they do find differences, right? You're indoctrinating them. They do find differences that are based on like your area of study and things like that. So I think like the criminal justice students in particular become more liberal as they go through and learn about stuff compared to more of the hard science and things like
Are they
that.
fun?
Yeah, there's a study that.
Yeah,
actually
so
looks
it's
at that.
selection into the study.
So, wait, it better be a question about Phil. Okay.
Um, How about this for a hypothesis, knowing nothing about the area?
Okay,
What if, for the non-whites, life has already given them a lot of the education that whites need to go to college to get?
well, that's why I think that you don't see the effect in the more liberal group, like the Democrats and moderates maybe. But I don't know why you have the conservative non-whites becoming more unless they just, it's a harden against your own group. Once you learn more about it or something like that. I don't have a good explanation for that.
Well,
But
it's
yes.
just being really weird being non-white conservatives in the first place.
Right. But yes, you would expect that, for non-whites, they're closer to where these issues are in the community and the criminal justice system.
Something, that particular group could be something about you're getting a different mix of non-whites when you get to that category.
That's what I'm one, but 13, yeah, we had 13%. And so maybe it's more heavily Asian and Hispanic and other groups than it is African Americans. And that's really,
That would
it'd be
be-
really nice to be able to break that out, And I think we just found a piece, I think Phil was just telling me that was about power needed for interactions because we got a lot of stuff about this non-white sample and even the groups that we know, I think we still need almost the full sample size that we have, we need over 2,500 people or something like that, and we don't have that to be able to test for those. But I would love
You
to.
can't even study, the African American sample, which you said is bigger, the biggest. one.
Right, but
That's not
it's,
enough to do anything.
right, it's like, yeah, 2,000.
So I have a question, so maybe I'm uninformed and biased.
Well, nobody would say that about you, Rich.
Well, I'm against the death penalty. However, I wouldn't say being in favor means you're uninformed and biased. I would say, when I read about whether it's a deterrent and they argue about it, and I don't know the answer.
What?
But
You're a scientist. What do you mean you don't know
well,
the answer?
They different studies show different stuff. Hard to figure out. I don't study it. So maybe if I had studied it, I'd have a clear answer. But people argue about it. And the call the people in favor uninformed and biased and stubborn and narrow-minded.
No, well, see, that's Phil's interpretation of this.
Okay.
That's not my interpretation of this. I am not, they're impervious to facts kind of person, no. But no, to the degree you think that's a legitimate form of punishment and that the people who need to be punished, that's just, and so that goes back to the emotions and whether it's symbolic, like using the death penalty is just symbolic for some people maybe. And that's just like, yeah, I have this hardened view of social order and control, and this is the group that's the problem, and I'm gonna just, so, so white support for the death penalty is very linked to racial animus, so there's that side of it. But I don't have that many.
You did have a Fred was doing a question.
Yes,
Oh, I was going to ask, to what degree do you think this is, I mean, this is sort of boiled down maybe to some of the variable bias, but to what degree do you think it's actually education that's driving this versus maybe like early socialization?
right. And so that's, when we make the argument for college education, we are arguing sort of in and out of the classroom learning too. So while you're going to college and meeting other people who are not like you in theory and doing some of that, we would expect some effect that's not just being taught straight through the class. Is that what the question is?
No, so mine's more like, because I'm not actually super familiar with stuff either, but isn't like most people's kind of political beliefs begin to form right when they're at 16, 17 or so, and so you might imagine maybe college amplifies.
So this is the interaction going the other direction.
It would be more just like the people who already are most likely not going to support the death penalty, self-select to go into college. And then we're like, oh, we see all these people who go to college don't like the death penalty, therefore it has to be college. Rather than some form of really, right, they grew up with little families or
Right.
little high school.
And that, I mean, that is sort of the argument for why we think college degree is muted for some folks, is because they're coming in with these ideas already. And I just had a thought for something else you said that I lost as fast as I had it. I'm trying to remember what you said exactly. Sorry, I got, I'm middle-aged. Yeah,
Let me
Yeah.
try and help.
okay, great, thank you.
So I guess I would say, I would look at that and say, it can't all be selection. Because selection into education, because you do see change in every group.
Mm-hmm,
And, if it was, say, if it was selection among liberals or Democrats, you would just see education do nothing.
Mhm.
In other words, if it was selection, political measures would moderate all of the education. It doesn't,
right,
even for the Republicans.
right,
So even when Republicans go to college, they decline in their sort of white Republicans.
right,
They
right.
decline a little bit.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
They just don't decline as much.
right, as the other groups,
Independents and Democrats.
right,
So that, right, the fact that it doesn't, the political measures don't mediate the education effect tells me that it can't just be early childhood selection. Not that that's not important, but if it were all selection, there wouldn't be an education effect once you control for religion, politics, other cultural
Right, and
backgrounds.
we have all of that in there. I had a much dumber comment, I think, which was that just more people are going to school now. And so there was some of that kind of thing. I would, you know, you wouldn't just have it being all Democrats that are going to college while all the Republicans flake out and aren't going anymore. But you have this increase in college enrollment more broadly. So that much better comment.
Speaking of well, speaking of that, gets to what my actual question. Can you talk more about you said you're looking at religion too.
Yes.
Can you talk more about that? And did you just look at religiosity or did you look at trad, types of
Mhm.
traditions?
Yes, we did look at that. And that is, the more conservative approaches were less likely, college was less likely to affect their views of the death penalty. Yes,
Don't change much.
right. The people who believe the Bible is a literal word of God don't change much. And also, whites amongst our white sample, right? So, yeah, it was kind of a similar thing. And I'm now like, I put that paper down and came to this one. So now I'm like, what did we find? But that one, what happened was, again, all of those really conservative religious measures that were significant were only significant in the first half of that time period and not in the second half. And what came out in the second half when we broke it apart was more atheist, like non-religious people. It wasn't the religious groups anymore. And so our sort of thinking was that it shifted, like maybe in the early part of our study here, it was religion, and then it switched to politics. And the later part, maybe in that religion effect goes away and the politics effect would then pop out of there. So that's one of the things we're looking at, kind of bigger as a package.
It's kind of like Nate Silver, if I heard, said along about 2015, everything becomes correlated. Religion, politics,
Right.
race, region, like it all becomes,
Mm-hmm.
correlated and packaged together
And education drives a lot.
Mhm. And rural urban too.
Yeah.
Which also correlates with education.
Hmm.
So it's really,
There's a lot to kind of unpack out of that
Yeah.
whole thing. And
The
you-
country has a multi-culinary
packed
problem.
together.
Yeah.
Packed into little tribes and.
With the rural thing, the to piggyback, we're all piggybacking, so I'll piggyback on Jeff. I grew up in.
Quit piggybacking.
I grew up in a town of 700 people and everyone but one person was white, right?
Right.
There was one Puerto Rican family. And she's my best friend. But so when I came to Penn State, I thought I was in a big city. This was like New York City to me. I've never met people from different cultures, so that out of classroom learning, the in classroom was important too, but the out of classroom, just like meeting and interacting with people from different backgrounds. A lot of rural people.
Right.
Don't.
No, you
get
don't.
that.
I came from a rural background too, and then my high school was all white, and I didn't have exposure till I went to college and, did all that too. So,
Yeah,
and
so I
same thing.
I think it is
And
important.
I actually had an African-American roommate as an undergrad for a few years, and yeah, it was enlightening for sure, no doubt.
Sir.
Sarah has a question.
Oh, this was kind of going back to what Joe.
No piggyback.
So I think maybe what you're bringing up is even outside of this like political or like liberal to moderate level is just also this not necessarily value of education, but like this idea that you will end up going to college. Is there a way that you could maybe control for that by looking at like whether or not the person was a first generation college student?
That's not gonna be in these data, I don't think. I'm pretty sure, but I don't think it is. But
Are there
yeah,
any
interesting.
questions coming in on Zoom?
No, I don't have any on.
Okay, go ahead, Derek.
My hand
Next.
I was gonna just say that it seems like a lot of the research now is that educated conservatives are actually politically independent because Trump has kind of taken over.
And I really like the fact that we split party from ideology for all of these kinds of reasons, because party is almost tainted anymore, shamed in different kinds of groups. Lots
And
of
so I'm wondering if you did this study now and you had
Yes.
data now, what would the pattern be? Would education, Trump sort of.
Yeah,
affects everything.
he killed it. Right, and so I'd be more in this kind of camp more now in this data of like, do we have fewer like real conservatives who attend college? And then are their views kind of really built in and hardened at this point when they do go to college? Such that like, you know, when you're getting that liberal arts education and they're telling you that stuff, like you're just getting angry while you're sitting there more than anything else, right? Because you're being indoctrinated if you have those kinds of views.
Is there voting behavior in the GSS? Or
In what?
like who you voted for in the last election?
I don't know about that. I will be honest, Phil's the expert in the GSS data. And so I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be good at it.
There are other, attitudes. Not that are associated with liberalism and conservatism, on there are others too.
Mm.
And you would think that they operate in the same way, right?
Yes.
Gender, and
Yeah.
Magazine subscriptions. New
Yeah.
York Times.
And I think that's a comment one of the reviewers gave us on one of these go rounds was like, fine, like this is probably a bigger package where they have the same views, you know, abortion and various kinds of issues like that too. Yes.
You get the sense that there's something like unique about the college experience itself, or rather like what while you're in college, like how that may shift even on the party lines or ideological.
Well, I think a little of both, but I think there's something unique about the college experience itself, about just being around other people. Like there's so much you can get through your coursework, but I think there is something to just talking to other people who aren't like you and being around other people who aren't like you and all of that. That's unique to college, gets you away from your family, your neighborhood, your friends and things like that, and puts you with people with different views. The self-selection into networks would be an interesting thing to look at when they get to college to see if they self-select out, you know, so they kind of are hanging out with their own homophily, right? And so then they wouldn't get that exposure, but.
Do you think that either this study or the religion study tells you anything new or important about death qualification for jurors? Like provides more on who's death qualified?
Right, and it is gonna be, so it's interesting you say that, because I presented a small piece of this at ASC, and there was an attorney or lawyer in the room who suggested I write a law review article for exactly this reason. She's like, lawyers are lazy, but this is important for like voir dire and death qualification and things like that. So, yes, I would say through that side, they definitely think there's something useful here. And you know, how they would use it, you know, no, but yeah, we can definitely tell them something about the types of people that are going to be more or less supportive. You can see that liberals are likely to be kicked off, you would think, right? And the conservatives would be more likely to be death qualified, but then they've got these really high levels of support. So.
Any more questions? If not, I would like to thank Amy for her presentation.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I actually have a copy of the paper here, so I can look at those control variables. There's certain kinds of thing. I don't have the religion one, but I got the other one. I got the religion one on my computer, but if you have specific kinds of questions. So. Okay.
Thank you so much.